You wake up one day and things feel off. There's no catastrophe, not exactly. But there's this invisible fog that hangs over everything you do. You look around and see that your room is messy. Your phone is overloaded with unread messages. Your mind constantly drifts toward things you'd rather avoid. You're anxious, you're tired, and you don't even know where to begin. That is the first symptom of inner chaos. And what makes it so dangerous is that it doesn't scream. It whispers. It doesn't arrive with fire and fury. It creeps in quietly, and before you even realize it, you're buried. People look for answers in all the wrong places. They search for something out there, maybe politics, maybe a new lifestyle trend or relationship, some revolutionary ideology that promises clarity. But that's the lie. The external world reflects your internal order or disorder. If your life feels chaotic, it's because you haven't brought order to your soul. That's where the real battle begins. That's the true domain of chaos. And you must confront it voluntarily, or it will manifest in ways you can no longer control. When you let the mess grow, it doesn't stay in one place. It infects everything. Think of your desk. If it's disorganized for a day, it's tolerable. But leave it for a week, a month, a year, and suddenly it's not just a desk, it's a symbol of your apathy. The piles of clutter become a metaphor for every goal you've avoided, every conversation you should have had, but didn't, every responsibility you pushed aside. Now amplify that to your habits, your self-talk, your relationships. It becomes psychological decay. And decay doesn't remain still, it spreads. You might say, well, the world's unfair, or I was dealt a bad hand, and that may be true. But none of that changes the fact that you are responsible for the condition of your soul. No one else will clean it for you. No one else will organize your chaos. You must choose to confront it. And that confrontation begins by telling yourself the truth, not a convenient, polished narrative. The brutal, unfiltered, soul-shaking truth. Where are you weak? Where are you lying? What do you avoid because it hurts to face? You start there. That's your map. And once you've identified the chaos, you begin to impose order, but not all at once. You're not supposed to rebuild the universe in a day. That's the arrogance of the idealist. You start with what's right in front of you. Clean your room, not because your mother told you to, but because it's a statement to the universe. I will bring order to this space, and then to myself. That action becomes symbolic. It says, I can affect the world. I am not helpless. And once you clean that room, maybe you start cleaning up how you spend your time. Maybe you stop wasting 5 hours a day on distractions. Maybe you stop pretending that the numbing habits aren't eroding your potential. And slowly you start to remember who you are, or who you could be. It's difficult, of course it's difficult. You will resist, you will negotiate with yourself. You will rationalize and backslide, that's to be expected. You've let the chaos grow for years. Don't expect it to vanish in a week. But even the smallest voluntary act of responsibility contains immense psychological power. It signals to the deepest parts of your being that you are not a passive observer of life. You are the one who confronts the dragon. You are the one who restores the fallen kingdom. It's not metaphorical, it's real. Because every act of order you create outside of you echoes inward. And the more order you build, the less chaos can control you. You begin to see patterns emerge. You find that when you wake up early and follow a routine, your mind is calmer. When you set boundaries in your relationships, you're less resentful. When you pursue truth, even when it's painful, you feel strangely stronger, like you've grown roots. These aren't tricks or hacks. They are ancient truths buried beneath the noise of modern distraction. Truth structure, meaning these are the antidotes to chaos, and they begin with your choice to confront the disorder you've ignored. And here's something you must understand: chaos isn't inherently evil. In fact, it's necessary. It's the unknown, the potential. It's the place where everything new is born. But if you do not bring yourself into proper alignment, if you do not approach it with discipline and humility, it will devour you. And you won't even realize it until it's too late. You'll become bitter, aimless, fragmented. So you have a choice. Do you allow chaos to rule you passively, or do you choose to engage it with intention, to wrestle with it like Jacob wrestled with the angel until you emerge changed? Because within the depths of your personal chaos is also the path to your transformation. You don't need to have all the answers. You only need to start by telling the truth and cleaning up what you can reach. That is how you reclaim your life, piece by piece, room by room, truth by truth. People have this modern idea that discipline is oppressive, that it's some kind of cruel restriction, a leftover relic from a harsher time. They imagine that freedom means doing whatever you want, whenever you want, and that any form of structure is an attack on individuality. But that's not freedom. That's chaos dressed up as liberation. And if you live like that long enough, you begin to see it. The late nights with no aim, the endless distractions, the anxiety that hovers even in your moments of pleasure. You begin to realize that undirected freedom doesn't elevate you, it consumes you. Discipline is not the enemy, it's the path. It's the bridge between who you are and who you could be. Without it, your potential remains a ghost, a concept, an unfulfilled possibility. But with it, discipline becomes the hand that shapes raw potential into purpose, into competence, into a life worth living. And yet people resist it because they think it limits them. What they don't realize is that everything meaningful requires limitation. A piano without structure is just noise. It's the discipline of music theory, of practice, of form. That creates melody, harmony, beauty. Your life is no different. You cannot do everything. That is not a curse, it's a gift. Because by saying no to 1,000 meaningless things, you begin to say yes to the few that matter. Discipline is the mechanism that enforces those boundaries. It says, I will get up at 6 a.m. not because I feel like it, but because my future self depends on it. I will work when I want to quit because I said I would. I will speak the truth even when my voice trembles, because my values are not for sale. Those are not just habits, they are declarations of identity. Discipline is the architect of identity. There's a strange thing that happens when you begin to impose structure on yourself. You expect that it'll make your life feel smaller, more rigid, suffocating. But the opposite happens. You actually become more free. Why? Because you're no longer a slave to your impulses. You don't waste hours scrolling through nonsense, chasing pleasure, avoiding discomfort. You're no longer dictated by momentary emotions. You are the one giving the orders. You become someone who acts rather than reacts. And that is the beginning of true power, not the ability to control others, but the ability to govern yourself. And that governance, it's hard. No one should lie to you about that. It requires daily confrontation with your weaker self. It requires you to say, yes, I'm tired. Yes, I'm discouraged. But I still do what needs to be done. That's the voice of someone who is forging character. And every time you listen to that voice, instead of the one that says, sleep and give up just this once, you grow a little stronger. Your discipline becomes muscle. And muscle is built under tension. You don't become disciplined by waiting for the motivation to arrive. You become disciplined by acting when you least feel like it. Now, it's tempting to believe that some people are just born more disciplined, more organized, more structured. That's false. Discipline is not a personality trait, it's a practice. It's earned through repetition, through failure, through recommitment. It's a choice you make every day, even on the days when it doesn't feel like it's working. Because the fruits of discipline don't show themselves immediately. They're like seeds planted deep underground. For a while, you see nothing. But something is happening. Something is growing. And if you keep showing up, if you keep watering the process, one day it breaks through the soil and everything begins to change. The cost of discipline is obvious effort, discomfort, sacrifice. But the cost of no discipline, that's far more brutal. Wasted years. Dead dreams, regret that calcifies into bitterness. When you don't have discipline, you default to chaos, and chaos has no mercy. It doesn't care that you had potential. It doesn't reward good intentions. It punishes indecision. And make no mistake, if you refuse to structure your life, something else will do it for you: pain, failure, addiction, resentment. You either voluntarily accept the burden of self-discipline, or you will involuntarily suffer the consequences of its absence. What you must understand is that discipline is not about punishing yourself. It's about aligning with the version of you that you deeply admire, the one you envision when you close your eyes and ask, who could I be if I truly got it together? That version of you is not passive. They don't wait for perfect conditions. They create them. They show up consistently. They live with intentionality. And that level of being is not reserved for the gifted or the lucky. It's reserved for the disciplined. You build that version of yourself with thousands of small, inconvenient, daily decisions. Each one a brick in the cathedral of your becoming. You do not need to start perfectly. You only need to start. Begin by identifying one part of your day that you can control and organize. Wake up at the same time. Make your bed. Finish what you start. Keep a promise to yourself. These aren't trivial actions. They're symbolic. They tell your subconscious, I am not at the mercy of chaos. I am building an order. And with each act of discipline, you restore a piece of yourself that had been scattered and fragmented by the noise of the world. Slowly, you stop being someone who watches life happen. You become someone who shapes it. Most people walk around waiting for a sign, waiting for clarity, waiting for the moment when the fog will lift and they'll suddenly just know what their purpose is. As if purpose is some kind of divine memo that lands in your inbox one day, fully formed and unmistakable. That belief is dangerous, because while you're waiting for certainty, life is moving, time is passing, and the chaos of existence is not going to pause until you figure it out. Purpose is not handed to you. It's forged in the act of shouldering responsibility and pursuing what's meaningful over what's expedient. We've been sold the idea that purpose is a feeling, something euphoric, something emotionally validating. But that's not the purpose. That's comfort. That's dopamine. The real purpose is not euphoric. It's often difficult. It's rooted in suffering and sacrifice. But it transforms the suffering into something noble, something necessary. You find your purpose in the very places you don't want to look, in the burdens you carry, in the duties you accept, in the difficult conversations you don't want to have, in the truths you're terrified to admit. If you want your life to matter, you have to be willing to shoulder weight. That's the paradox. The more responsibility you take on, the more meaningful your life becomes. But we live in a time where we avoid responsibility like a virus. We're told that we're victims of our circumstances, that someone else is to blame, that someone else should fix the system. And yet, strangely, the more we externalize responsibility, the more empty we feel, the less connected we are, the more disoriented we become. That's because purpose is inextricably tied to your capacity to take ownership of your own existence. When you say, this is on me, something fundamental in you shifts. You go from passive to active, from drifting to anchored. You don't have to know where you're going with perfect clarity. You only need to aim at what you know is meaningful. You start by asking, what am I avoiding? What part of my life have I neglected that I know deep down is calling for my attention? Maybe it's your health. Maybe it's the way you treat people. Maybe it's your dishonesty, your lack of discipline, your refusal to confront old wounds. Whatever it is, that's the signal. That's the call. You're not going to find your purpose on a vision board. You're going to find it at the point where your voluntary effort meets a difficult responsibility. That's the threshold between who you are and who you could be. Purpose doesn't come prepackaged. It's built through engagement with the real world. It's found in caring for things that fall apart if you don't tend to them. It's found in being reliable, in standing firm when it's easier to quit, in protecting something fragile when no one else will. And strangely, the more you commit to those responsibilities, the more alive you feel. The world begins to open up. People begin to rely on you. You begin to trust yourself. That's the genesis of purpose. It grows through effort. It deepens through commitment. It emerges through the very act of showing up again and again. And you don't need to change the whole world. You only need to take on what is in front of you and carry it properly. You begin by being the kind of person who cleans up their own room before trying to fix the world. That's not a joke. That's symbolic. It means that if you cannot bring order to your immediate surroundings, you have no business pretending to solve problems beyond your reach. But once you do clean your room, once you do take responsibility for yourself, then your capacity begins to expand, then you can take on more. And as your capacity expands, so does your sense of meaning. You don't need to feel like doing it. You don't need to be in the mood. You simply need to choose the burden that matters more than your comfort. And that burden will ask for everything you've got. It will demand discipline, sacrifice, and consistency. But that's the price of a meaningful life. And here's the truth: if you don't pay that price, you pay another one: regret, emptiness, cynicism, a slow erosion of the soul, because deep down you know you were made for more than scrolling and sleeping and settling. You were made to aim. To aim at something noble and difficult and worthwhile, you will never feel fully ready. And that's the point. Purpose begins when you move forward despite uncertainty, when you say yes to the challenge before the conditions are perfect, when you stand up and say, I don't know exactly where this leads, but I'm willing to carry the responsibility. That act right there, that's sacred, because it transforms you. It takes you out of your trivial concerns and roots you in something transcendent, something durable. Purpose is not found in the absence of suffering. It's discovered when you choose to carry suffering with dignity for the sake of something beyond yourself. People think they need to find themselves. No, you don't need to find yourself. You need to build yourself. You need to construct yourself like a cathedral, brick by brick, act by act, sacrifice by sacrifice. And the blueprint is written in responsibility. What are you willing to carry even when no one sees you? What burden are you willing to lift, not because you're forced to, but because you choose to? That is where you'll find your strength. That is where you'll find the next step. That is where purpose lies. There's a dangerous narrative running rampant in our culture, a message whispered into the ears of millions that says, you are powerless, that life has conspired against you, that everything bad in your life is someone else's fault. Your parents, your boss, the government, the economy, your childhood, your biology, your trauma. And while it's true that life is profoundly unfair and people are born into wildly different circumstances, the belief that you are merely a victim, forever at the mercy of external forces, is a recipe for resentment, paralysis, and despair. It removes your ability to act. And when you lose your ability to act, you lose your grip on meaning. You see it everywhere. People who have completely surrendered to the idea that they are trapped in a system designed to oppress them, surrounded by people who misunderstand them, are doomed to fail because of conditions beyond their control. And the worst part is, they've accepted it. They've made peace with their own helplessness. But that peace is shallow. Beneath it lies bitterness, envy, and a growing frustration with life itself. And eventually that frustration turns inward. It causes depression. It becomes an addiction. It becomes a slow decay of the soul, not because life is cruel, but because they gave up their last weapon, responsibility. Responsibility is not about guilt. It's not about taking blame for things that weren't your fault. It's about reclaiming power. It's about saying, maybe this mess wasn't all mine to begin with, but now that it's in front of me, I will take ownership of what I can do next. That shift from blame to responsibility is one of the most radical transformations a human being can make. Because it marks the moment you stop being a passive subject of fate and begin to act as the architect of your own future. You stop waiting for someone to come and fix it. You stop fantasizing about rescue. And instead, you take up the burden voluntarily. And yes, responsibility is a burden. But it's the kind of burden that makes you stronger. It stretches your soul. It grows your character. It demands effort, sacrifice, and discipline. But those demands are what make it meaningful. They're what carve out your identity. When you choose to take responsibility, real, uncomfortable, voluntary responsibility, you tell the world and yourself that you are willing to bear the weight of existence. You stop pretending that life should be easy. You stop searching for comfort and start searching for strength. Ask yourself honestly, where have you handed away your responsibility? What parts of your life have you quietly decided are someone else's job to fix? Is it your health, your mindset, your career, your relationships? Maybe you've been telling yourself that if only your parents were different, if only your past was kinder, if only people understood you better, then you'd be thriving. But here's the truth: the conditions will never be perfect. And even if they were, you'd still have to face the same question. What are you doing with your life right now? Responsibility is not a trap. It's the escape from the trap. It's the ladder out of the pit. It is the path to dignity. Because when you start to carry the weight, you start to become someone worth respecting, first in your own eyes, and then in the eyes of others. You start to develop a track record with yourself. You say you're going to do something, and then you do it. You show up. You push through discomfort. You sacrifice ease for the sake of something greater. That's not punishment. That's transformation. That's the process of becoming someone capable of bearing real meaning. There is no power without responsibility. People often want influence, status, control, but they want it without the responsibility that makes those things legitimate. True authority, real strength, comes from being the kind of person who cares that others won't. Who steps in when it's hard? Who leads not with entitlement but with service? If you want to become someone powerful, you must become someone responsible. The two are inseparable. Responsibility is what earns you the right to lead. It's what gives your voice weight, your actions credibility, your presence and gravity. And here's what most people don't realize: responsibility can be terrifying at first, but over time, it becomes addictive. Because when you accept it fully, you begin to feel something unfamiliar: control. Not control over others, but control over yourself, over your reactions, over your trajectory, over your story. You're no longer tossed around by every wind of emotion, every setback, every criticism. You become grounded, and that groundedness becomes your foundation. It becomes the place you operate from. You stop trying to avoid suffering and instead decide to suffer for something, to endure pain with a purpose. This is how you rebuild your life, one act of responsibility at a time. You clean up what you've been avoiding. You apologize where you've been wrong. You stop lying. You set a standard. And when it gets hard, and it will, you don't look for a way out. You look for a way through. You stand tall in the storm and say, I can bear this. And each time you do, the storm inside you weakens. Each time you carry the weight instead of collapsing beneath it, you grow stronger, clearer, more aligned. You begin to respect yourself. And that respect becomes the seat of power. Power that is rooted in responsibility, not dominance, not manipulation, but truth, integrity. Because it is only when you decide to carry what you can that you finally discover what you are truly capable of. You are not a spectator in this life. You are not here to drift, to blame, or to wait for the world to hand you purpose, structure, or identity. You are here to face the storm, to confront the chaos within you, and begin the long, difficult work of turning it into order. That's your task. That's your responsibility. And in that responsibility lies something profound: freedom. Discipline is not your enemy. It's your liberation. It's the structure that takes your potential and gives it shape. It's the daily decision to show up, not because it feels good, but because it's right. And when you live like that, when you act with intention, when you move with direction, you begin to silence the chaos. You begin to remember who you could be. Purpose is not discovered in moments of comfort, but in moments of sacrifice. You won't find it scrolling, avoiding, or escaping. You'll find it where your discomfort meets your responsibility. You'll find it when you take the burden upon yourself and carry it not with bitterness, but with courage. That's when life begins to mean something again. That's when suffering becomes worthwhile. And it all comes down to one decision: to take responsibility for your life, no matter what has happened before. Because once you do, you reclaim your agency. You stop being a victim of the world and start becoming a force within it, a force of order, of strength, of meaning. Conquer the chaos, build discipline, find your purpose, take responsibility. Your life depends on it, and so does the world.